Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening whenever you are watching this video. This is John, your mother language instructor, with another video about the United States of America. So let's remember, if at any point you need to pause the video, please go ahead and do so. There might be a few times where I suggest that you pause the video to take some more time to look at one of our slides or to take a moment to complete an activity. But aside from that, I will leave it up to you. But let's go ahead and let's jump right into it, okay? So today we are starting our second unit, okay? So today we are talking about the geography of the United States of America, all right? Now this will be a three-part series, right? So we will talk today, and we will have two more lessons covering the geography of the United States of America. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Let's see what our objectives are today. So today, we are going to learn about 9 regions of the United States. Now, we won't be covering them all in detail, but we will be talking about the first 3 of these 9 regions in the United States. And I also want us to learn about the 5 climate zones in the United States of America. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our warm-up. So, for our warm-up today, here we can see a picture of our warm-up slide. And this is what I would like for us to do. Here are your instructions. So I want you to pause the video and I want you to read the following questions aloud. I want you to first answer the questions as best you can. That means that you'll write down your answers on another sheet of paper. And I want you to be prepared to share these answers with the rest of the class when we see each other next. So let's go ahead and take a look at our questions. So these questions are about the United States, and specifically here at the top, they're asking, what do you know about the United States already? What information, what knowledge do you already have about the United States? That's what I want us to talk about for our warm-up. So now might be a good time to pause the video, read the questions out loud, and write your answers down on a separate sheet of paper. So I'll give you a moment to pause the video now. Okay, so I will go ahead and read our questions out loud, and then we'll answer these together next time that we see each other in class. So let's start at the very top. We'll start with our first bullet point. The first question is, how many states are in the United States? Question number 2, how many state capitals are there in the United States? Question number 3, how many climates or ecosystems can you find in the United States? And number 4, how many geographical features can be found in the United States? Question number 5, how many time zones does the United States span? And number 6, how many different regions do you think the United States has? Number 7 and question number 8 kind of go together. Let's read number 7 first. Can you name any cities in the United States? And question number 8, where are they located? Do you know what region they are located in? So these questions, I want you to answer them, and we will talk about them when we see each other next in class, okay? So let's move on to our terms, our geography vocabulary, all right? Now, I want to read these terms out loud. You'll see lots of these terms throughout the course of this video and our following 2 videos as well. So I want you to hear how to pronounce these words, just in case you haven't heard them before. So we'll begin with directions here at the top. So let me start. I'll say Directions: north, south, east, west, northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest, central, region, and state. So these are all terms that can help us find our directions, where we are in a particular place. Let's go on to our next slide. And here, there are some more geography terms. So let's start with landscape here at the top, and we'll go down each column, all right? Landscape: glacier, hill, canyon, desert, river, ocean, rainforest, mountain, lake, peninsula, bay, plateau, beach, valley, cliff, waterfall, mesa, plain, sea, coast, volcano, cave. And these are all terms that describe different geographical features that you can find in a particular place. Let's move on to our next slide. And here, these terms are all dealing with weather. So let's start in the top left. We'll start with weather, and we'll work our way down each of the columns. Weather, flood, rain, tornado, fog, clouds, blizzard, storm, hail, snow, cold, hot, mild, overcast, wind, and here we have climate types. Climate types. Now remember, there are 5 climate types, okay? So here are a list. Here's a list of each of those climate types. So we'll start with tropical, arid, temperate, continental, polar. All right. And let's move on to our reading exercise. So before we go on to our next exercise, now these terms, we will see these all in this presentation, all right? And they will also be used in our second and our third video as well. So if you need to refer back to these terms, please pause the video, scroll back, and you can look at these terms again if you do need them. And I'll also include them at the end of each presentation as well, just so that you have them. So let's go on to our next slide. This here is our reading exercise. So here's what I would like for us to do. I want us to pause the video. I want you to read each of these paragraphs out loud, and then after you are finished reading each of these bullet points, we'll come back together and we'll read them together, okay? So now might be a good time to pause the video and read these sentences first before we read them together. All right, so pause the video now. All right, and welcome back. Hopefully you have just paused our video and you have read these pieces of text out loud first to see how you would pronounce some of these words. But let's go ahead and let's start with our first bullet point here. So the text reads, "The United States of America is the world's 3rd largest country in size and nearly the 3rd largest in terms of population. Located in North America, the country is bordered on the west by the Pacific Ocean and to the east by the Atlantic Ocean. Along the northern border is Canada and the southern border is Mexico. There are 50 states and the District of Columbia." Now, do you know what the District of Columbia is? Yeah, the District of Columbia is the United States capital, okay? So it's commonly referred to as Washington, D.C. But the D.C. in Washington, D.C., it stands for the District of Columbia, okay? So it's the capital. It's not technically a state, okay? It's a different region. It's a different city all entirely by itself. So let's go on and read our second bullet point. More than twice the size of the European Union, the United States has high mountains in the west and a vast central plain. The lowest point in the country is in Death Valley, which is at negative 282 feet or negative 86 meters, and the highest peak is Denali, or Mount McKinley, at 20,320 feet, or 6,198 meters. So, taking a look at this reading exercise, can you summarize what this text is telling us? What have we learned after reading this together? So very simply, this is a description of the United States of America, all right? We're using our geographical terms, right? North, south, east, and west, and we are describing where we can find the United States in the world, okay? So we know that it's in North America. There is a country to the north called Canada, and to the south, there's a country called Mexico, okay? On the west side of the country, there is the Pacific Ocean, and on the east side of the country, there is the Atlantic Ocean, okay? And then it's going on to tell us the size, the scale of the United States, okay? And the first sentence here in our second paragraph says that it is more than twice the size of the European Union. So if you were to take the EU, double it in size, and add a little bit more, that's the size of the United States of America. So in short, the US is a massive country. It is a very, very large place. And we will see that here in just a moment when we learn about some of the different regions. So let's go ahead and let's move on to our next slide, okay? So here we are talking about the 5 types of climate zones. Now remember, if you have taken geography before, you will remember that there are 5 different types of climate zones. Let me go over them quickly. The first is tropical, right? And that is a climate zone that's near the equator, okay? It rains quite a lot, the temperatures are very high, it's warm, there are dry seasons and wet seasons. That's a tropical climate zone, all right? The second climate zone is an arid climate zone. Now, this is a place where it typically receives very little precipitation. Okay, so most people, when they hear arid, they think of a desert. But remember, in the North Pole and in the South Pole, that's also considered to be an arid region because it receives very, very little snowfall. All right, so remember, the level of precipitation, how much it receives, that determines whether an area is considered to be arid or dry. All right, so that's our second climate zone. Our third climate zone is a temperate climate zone. And temperate means exactly that. It's in the middle. It's nice, right? It's mild. There are 4 distinct seasons. So you have winter, you have spring, you have summer, you have fall. It doesn't rain a lot, but it does rain some. There are changes in these seasons, and the weather typically stays very close to a median level, right? So it means that it's not overly hot and it's not overly cold, okay? So that's our temperate climate zone. And then number 4 is a continental climate, Okay, and this climate zone is typically described as being a climate that is away from any large body of water. Okay, so it's removed from, say, a large ocean like the Atlantic Ocean or maybe the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so this climate zone, it tends to be a little bit colder than our temperate climate zone, and the winters are extreme. They're a little bit more extreme than our temperate climates. All right, there's still 4 seasons, right? And it's still considered to be warm in the summertime, all right? But it is a little bit different than our temperate climate zone, but it is similar. So that is our 4th climate zone. And then number 5 is our polar climate zone. Now, these are our coldest places on the planet. It's places that are typically in the very far north or the very south of the globe in the world. So these are places that are typically very, very cold. It won't get very warm over the course of an average summer because these places are so north or so south and they receive very little direct sunlight. Okay, so we will actually see all 5 of these different climate zones in the United States. That's how big the country is, right? That's how diverse the landscapes are across the United States. So I wanted to just briefly go over our 5 climate zones so that in the future, if you hear me talking about a temperate climate zone or a tropical climate zone, you will be able to remember what it is that we're talking about specifically. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. So let me ask you, what can you see in this slide? What are we looking at? Yeah, this is a map of the United States, all right? And it's a map that is showing something in particular. There's something very specific that this map is telling us. Can you imagine, can you guess what it is that this map is telling us? Yeah, it's right here at the top. Let's look. So here we see the United States, and there are different colors, right? There's a tan color here first, then a gray, a darker gray, a sort of gray-green mix. Then we have a Kelly green, which is bright, and then there's a dark green. And look, it's showing us, it's telling us what that means here below. Low, basso, hills, colline, and mountains, montagne. Okay, so it's telling us that this is the elevation of the United States. And look, you can see that here in the west, that there are lots of mountains. It's very, very, very high here, right? We can see that this is the Rocky Mountain Range. We'll learn more about that later. But there are lots of mountains here in this region, okay? And you can see that all the way throughout in green. And if you remember back to our reading exercise, that's what the text was telling us. It said, in the west of the United States, there are mountains, right? And then in the center, in the middle of the United States, there's a vast central plain. So it means that the land is very flat. It's very level. It's close to the sea level. There's not a lot of elevation change. It's very level and flat. And then in the eastern corner of the United States, you can see there's another smaller mountain range that we call the Appalachian Mountains. Appalachian Mountains, okay? And you can see there's some green here in places, parts of Tennessee, and it looks like West Virginia and Virginia. There's some taller mountains there, but for the most part, the Appalachian Mountains are lower than many of the mountains that you'll find in the western part of the United States. So That's what this map is telling us. It's telling us the elevation of the United States, how high certain things are or how low certain things are, okay? And we can also see other geographical features, right? We can see things like lakes, we can see things like rivers, we can see things like what else can we see? We can see plains, we can see those lakes here. Exactly, so places like Crater Lake, we can also see Salt Lake, we can see rivers as well. So here we have the Missouri River that runs all the way into the Mississippi. And there's some more tributaries that make their way into the Mississippi. We see another large river, the Ohio, that does the same, that dumps into the Mississippi before running south into the Gulf of Mexico. Okay. We see some other inlets and places that are close to the ocean, the coastline. We see another lake here in Florida, right? We see the desert as well. So there are all sorts of different things that we can see in this map, all right? So let's go ahead and let's move on to our next slide. Okay, so I'll ask you the same question. What are we looking at here in this slide? What is this slide telling us? So if you've said that we're looking at a map, you're exactly right. And look, this is a map that's showing us the regions of the United States. So it's telling us here in the top left corner of the map what this map is of. Okay, and down below, you can see that this is a key, right? This key is telling us what we can see in the map. So if we are looking at the regions of the United States, and here in our key, it's color coordinated, you can assume that these names here, I'll go ahead and just point those out, that those names are the different regions in the United States. So for example, if you're looking at the New England region, which is this region in red, you can see that here it is. It's up in the upper right hand corner of the United States. So let's go ahead and let's read our text now. So the country is divided into 9 regions: New England, the Mid-Atlantic, the South, the Midwest, the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains, the West Coast, the Southwest, and Alaska and Hawaii. All right, so let's look at our key down below, and I'll point out those regions. So we've already looked at New England. It's this region here in red, in the upper right-hand corner of the map. The next, if we go from left to right, the next is the Mid-Atlantic, this region in yellow. Next is the Midwest, it's this region here in teal. Okay. And then to the left of that, we see the Great Plains, these 5 states here in the center of the country. We see the South, which is this large region in orange here at the bottom of the map. We see the Southwest is this region in green here. Obviously, it's in the southwest portion of the United States. In blue here, we see the Rocky Mountains. So we saw that earlier in our map, our topographical map of the United States, showing us the elevation of this region. So that mountain range, the region is named after the Rocky Mountains. Okay, in purple here, along the Pacific Ocean, we see the West Coast region. And then our last region here is 2 separate places, right? Alaska is to the, it's the northwest. It's up north. It's almost to Russia, right? Across the Bering Strait. And it borders Canada, okay? And then Hawaii, this island here, is all the way out in the Pacific Ocean. It's very, very far away. But these two places are very different. They're very far away from each other, but for the sake of the regions, they are combined into one region because they are considered to be they are not a part of the continental United States, or as they are commonly referred to as the lower 48 states, because Alaska and Hawaii are both states and they are not connected to this main continent. So those are our 9 regions of the United States. All right, I know it took us a little while to talk about them all and to explain where they all are in proximity to each other, but we will talk more about each of these regions specifically over the course of our next 2.5 videos. So in today's class, we will be talking about the first 3 regions. We'll be talking about New England, the region in red here, the Mid-Atlantic region, which is this region in yellow, and we'll be talking about the South, or the southern region, and it's this region in orange, okay? So that is what we'll be talking about today. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first region. Okay, so I'm going to talk through the presentation at this point, all right? I'm going to assume that if you need to take a moment that you'll pause the video on your own, and I would recommend that you do for each slide, because I want you to practice describing and thinking about how you will use your English to describe what it is that we are seeing, right? What we can see in the photos, or what we can see in the text, okay? So now might be a good time to pause the video. So I'll give you the gesture pause now. Okay. So let's take a look. The first thing that I see is a map to the right of our slide. So this is a map of the New England region, and I'm assuming that these states that are all different colors, that those are the states that we'll be talking about in this region. So I can see, starting at the very top here, this is the state of Maine in gold. New Hampshire is the next state, it's in red. To the west of New Hampshire, we see Vermont, the state in blue. And to the south of those 2 states, we see in green, Massachusetts. It's a very difficult word to say, Massachusetts. And here, this small state in purple is called Rhode Island. Rhode Island. And to the west of Rhode Island and the south of Massachusetts, this is the state of Connecticut, another pretty difficult state to pronounce. So let's take a look at our text. The text reads, New England is in the northeast of the United States, okay? There are 6 states in the region of New England. All right, we counted those as well. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, okay? So these states are Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. Okay, so that's a pretty straightforward slide. We see a map of a region. We've learned that there are 6 states in this region, and we've learned their names. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so here we are seeing, this is the climate of New England. So we're going to be talking about the weather, okay? And here to the right, we can see a lovely picture of what looks to be New England in the autumn, maybe late summer, early autumn. So let's take a look and see what it feels like to be in New England. Okay, so our first slide here, this is a picture of a forest covered in snow. So let's read our text here below. Most of New England has a humid continental climate with cold winters and heavy snowfall from December to February. All right, so if you remember from our climate zones, the continental climate zone, that was our fourth, and it's pretty cold. There's still 4 seasons, we still have 4 seasons, but it gets really, really cold over the winter, right? And sometimes it's even cold in autumn and in spring, okay? So it's a place that's very cold. All right, so let's move on to our next slide. And look, here we see a picture, a beautiful, beautiful picture. It looks like we see mountains here in the distance, blue skies, really bright, vibrant green forests. All right, so let's look at our text. Summers are warm with some rainfall spread throughout the year. Okay, so it rains some in the New England region. Okay, very good. Let's move on. And here we see a picture of what looks to be the coast. This is the Atlantic Ocean here in the background. And we can see a lovely park bench that's overlooking this view, right? And there are some bushes here, these green bushes. They're nice, bright, and vibrant. And then even in the background here, you can see some rocks, okay? So our text below reads, as you move further south, you'll get to enjoy milder climates, okay? So that's true anywhere, right? If you think of Italy, if we are here in the north, as you move further south, the climate starts to get warmer, right? As you move to places, say, like Puglia or Bari or Napoli, or even further south in Sicilia, right? The weather starts to change. The climate starts to get warmer. It's exactly the same in the United States. So let's go ahead and look at our next slide. And here we will see the landscape of New England. So what type of geographical features can you see in this region specifically? And look, here to the right, we see another painting. This time we see a portrait of what looks to be New England in the autumn, right? Because we see all of these bright colors, red, orange, yellow, all mixed together. And there's a beautiful church here in the center of our portrait. Looks lovely. So let's look at our landscapes. All right, so our first picture here is showing us there is a lighthouse. There's a lighthouse here on the coast. It looks like that there are rocks that are surrounding this lighthouse, and we can see to the right of our photo that there is the ocean. So let's look at our text. The physical geography of New England is diverse, all right? So diverse is another way to say it's different. There are many, many different types of geographies in the region of New England. Okay, so let's take a look and see. All right, so here we see a picture of what looks to be forests, and there's also an inlet, right? I would imagine that this is salt water. This is the ocean, okay? So it says here in our text below that the southeastern New England is covered by a narrow coastal plain. So a narrow coastal plain means that it's an area that's close to the ocean, right? The coast, and it's flat. Okay? So that's describing southeastern New England, all right? And moving on, we see a photo of mountains, and these don't look to be particularly high, but they're mountains nonetheless, right? We see lots of different elevation changes here. In the background, you can see these mountains further away, and there's some more mountains here in the middle of the portrait, and even more here with trees on them as well in the foreground of our photo. So our text is telling us that while the western and northern regions are dominated by the rolling hills and worn down peaks of the northern end of the Appalachian Mountains, all right? So if you remember in our slide earlier, when we saw the elevation of the United States, the Appalachian Mountains were a smaller series of mountains. They were a little bit shorter than the Rocky Mountains out west, but this is describing those mountains, and it's saying that in New England, in the northern part of the country, that there are some rolling hills and worn down peaks of this mountain range. Okay, so if you need to, I would suggest going back to looking at that map if you can, if you would like to. So in the meantime, let's move on to our next slide. So here we see a picture of the ocean, right? There are boats, there are all sorts of boats that are in this little bay, this inlet here. And the text is saying that eastern New England is lined by the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so eastern New England is lined by the Atlantic Ocean. That makes sense, right? If you remember the map of the United States, you remember that Maine is up here, right? And then you have Vermont, and then lower you have places like Boston and Rhode Island. They're on the ocean, right? They're on the ocean. So it's exactly what our text is telling us. Okay, and you can see that here in our next slide, right? So here we see the coast. You see Maine, you see New Hampshire, you see Massachusetts, right? All of these places, Rhode Island and Connecticut, they're all on the coast, right? They're bordering the northern Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so here in this slide, we are looking at the notable cities in New England. Right? So there are a couple. The first and probably most famous is Boston, Massachusetts. All right, here is Boston, Massachusetts. Okay, I'll circle it for you. Our second city is Providence, Rhode Island. It happens to be the capital of this state, Rhode Island. Okay, another popular city or notable city is New Haven. Right? There's actually a pretty famous university that's located there in New Haven, Connecticut. Yale, you might have heard of it. It's pretty well known. It's a very, very famous university in the United States. And then number 4, another popular, well-known city is Cambridge, Massachusetts. Right? And this is also in the greater Boston area, but it is technically another place. Right? It's very close to Boston, but it's considered to be a separate place as well, a separate city. There are also a couple of pretty well-known universities in Cambridge. You have places like Harvard University, you have places like MIT, you have places like Boston University that are all in this area as well. So it is a very, very well-known, popular city in the United States. So those are our notable cities here in New England. So we'll go back to our next slide and we will look, the text at the top says, next we will see the Mid-Atlantic region. Let me ask you, do you remember which region is the Mid-Atlantic? So it tells us here in the text, this region is in yellow. And here, if you look in the key, you can see there's the Mid-Atlantic. And it's right next to our yellow color. So let's find yellow on the map. And yep, there it is. There is our Mid-Atlantic region. So let's take a look and see which states are in this region. All right. So here is a map of the Mid-Atlantic region. It's over to the right of our slide. And we can see these states that are colored, right? The different colors. We start with New York here in the top. And blue is Pennsylvania. Here in the yellow or gold is New Jersey. Delaware is here in a lighter blue. Maryland we see also in gray. And then West Virginia, okay, is also here. Now, I do want to point this out. So Virginia, I've actually put Virginia in the South. Okay, this is another conversation that we can have, but the regions are suggestions. Okay, there's not concrete, definite it's not uniform throughout, okay? And sometimes some of these states are included in different regions. Sometimes, for example, there are states that are said to be in the Southwest, but others consider them to be in the South, or maybe they're in the Rocky Mountain region. It depends, okay? So again, remember that the regions are a general suggestion of how to group different states together in a particular place, okay? And what's typical are the geographic features, right? The land itself, but also there are some cultural differences, okay? So there are some regions that are also cultural as well. So even though Virginia is colored in this map, I've actually included this in our southern region. So we'll see more about Virginia in just a moment. But we have these 6 states: New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and West Virginia are in the Mid-Atlantic region. So let's take a look at our text. It starts by saying that the Mid-Atlantic region is located to the southeast of New England. And we can see that here, right? We've just learned about New England. It's these 5 states here, 6 states up to the northeast. And the Mid-Atlantic is this region just to the southeast of New England, all right? And this region includes the states of Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and the capital, Washington, D.C., is also included in that, okay, in that region as well. So let's move on to our next slide. And here we can see this is a map of some of these larger cities here in the Mid-Atlantic region. Places that you might have heard of, places like New York City or Philadelphia or Baltimore and Pittsburgh. We'll see more about them in a second. And the text here below says that these industrial areas attracted millions of European immigrants and gave rise to some of the East Coast's largest cities. So in the 1800s and 1900s, when lots of people were coming from Europe and moving to the United States, many of these people would move to places like New York City or Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Atlantic City, okay? So let's take a look at some of these cities. The first being New York City, New York. Very, very popular city, very well known, one of the world's most famous cities. Yeah, we'll talk more about New York in class, I'm sure. So that's one city. Baltimore, Maryland is our next city. And here we can see a picture of downtown Baltimore. All right, it's right on the ocean here. Let's see our next city. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love is its nickname. And here we see the downtown Philadelphia city skyline. And next, we have Pittsburgh. So we see all of these bridges here, and these very, very famous yellow bridges all throughout Pittsburgh. And we can see the downtown city skyline, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So these are 4 of the largest cities that are found in the Mid-Atlantic region. So let's take a look at our climate. Let's look at the climate of the Mid-Atlantic. So we see a picture here of what looks to be a really nice spring day. So let's look. Ooh, in our slide here, look, if you remember, this is Pittsburgh, right? We just saw these bridges in the last slide. Okay, so this is a photo of Pittsburgh in what I'm assuming it must be the winter, right? Because look, the text says, in general, the states of the Mid-Atlantic region have cold winters. Okay, so it's still very, very cold in this region as well. And look, it also has hot summers. So the winters are cold, the summers are hot, okay? And look, our next slide, this is a area that looks to be very close to the ocean, okay? And the text says that some areas experience almost 100% humidity during the summer. So it feels very, very wet, right? When you walk outside and it's hot, it feels very, very wet. The air on your skin feels very damp, very moist, very, very sticky, right? So we can feel that 100% humidity during the summer, okay? And look, this text in our next slide says, this region has Pleasant Springs. And look, this is a picture, actually, this is the Jefferson Memorial, I believe, in Washington, D.C. And we see these cherry blossoms, these very, very typical trees that grow in Washington, D.C. That's very well known in this city specifically. So it looks beautiful. I mean, that just looks gorgeous, doesn't it? Just looks like you want to sit out there all day and just look at the water and I'm sure listen. And yeah, it looks wonderful. So the Mid-Atlantic region has these Pleasant Springs, okay? And look, our next slide is telling us that it also has colorful autumns. And look at all of these colors that you can see. Yellow, red, green, right? Oranges here, some darker shades of purple and pink, right? So we can see all of these different colors. Okay, our next slide, we see a woman wearing a mask here. So we must know that this picture was taken probably sometime during COVID. And she's underneath an umbrella here. And look, the text says that the precipitation, or the amount of rain, ranges from 32 inches to 52 inches. And look, in parentheses, that's 81 centimeters to 132 centimeters a year. So it rains a lot. There's lots of precipitation and snow and ice in this region, okay? So next, let's look at our landscape of the Mid-Atlantic. Let's look at the landscape. Okay, so our text here says the landscape ranges from coastal plains along the coastline. So that means that there are flat areas that are near the ocean, okay? Our next slide says that there are rolling hills in the middle, right? So in the Mid-Atlantic region, the middle of the Mid-Atlantic region, there are some rolling hills. And then there are mountains farther inland, okay? So as you move away from the sea, the elevation starts to change. It starts to get a little bit varied and diverse. And then once you get very far away from the ocean, there are lots of different mountains, okay? And the mountains are quite tall. They're quite steep. Okay. So this next slide, we see a photo of some boats here in a bay or harbor. And the text is telling us that this area has good coastal harbors for shipping. Okay, so if you remember our lessons about the history of the United States, this region was actually the first that was colonized, or that was colonized by a couple of other European countries, right? Because there were so many places that you could pull a very large boat right up to the land, and you could jump off of the boat, settle the land, and start a colony. So the Mid-Atlantic region had many, many different colonies throughout the course of its early history in the history of the United States. So moving on to our last slide for the Mid-Atlantic region, we are talking about the notable cities. I'll point these out to you. So we have first, and probably the most famous, we have New York City, New York. Then number 2, we have Philadelphia here in Pennsylvania. Number 3 is Baltimore, Maryland. Number 4 is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that city with bridges. Number 5 is the capital of the United States. This is Washington, D.C. And I've also included 2 cities in New York. So we have Buffalo, right, which is actually the capital of New York. Or excuse me, Buffalo is not the capital of New York. Albany is the capital of New York. Excuse me. We have Buffalo, which is another, it's a large city. It's very close to the Niagara Falls. And then we have our final city is Albany, right? Albany, which is the capital. So those cities I've included in our notable cities for this region. And let's move on. I want to very quickly talk about our last region in the United States for this lesson. So we will be talking about the final region in this video we're going to be talking about is the South, okay? And our text here in our slide tells us that. It says, next we will see the South. This region is in orange. Now look, here's our region, South. You can see it here in orange. And there are many, many states. I mean, just counting, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We have 12 different states that are in the South, okay? So let's go ahead and look at our next slide. All right, so here we see another map. It shows these states in the southern region. Okay, remember we've included West Virginia in our mid-Atlantic region, so we're talking about these states. We're talking about the states of Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. Okay, so those are the states that we're talking about. And the text here at the top says that the region of the South is located to the south of the Mid-Atlantic region. Okay, so the region that we just talked about, right, the region with those big cities, right, and those coastal harbors and the ports, so the South is directly beneath that region, okay, and it's these 11 states, all right, that we've just talked about. So let's go ahead, let's take a look at the climate of the South. Okay, so our first slide, we see a picture of what looks to be cotton fields. Okay, there's a blue sky up above and some pine trees here in the background. And our text says that the South has two distinct regions that vary in climate and in seasons. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's take a look. And here, in our next slide, we actually see a certain city. It's a city that I love very, very much. So this is a picture of downtown Memphis. This is a picture of Memphis. I'll tell you more about Memphis in a moment. But the text says that the weather is sunny and can be very warm or hot day and night. So the South of the United States is very similar to southern Italy, right? It can be sunny and warm or even hot in the daytime or in the evening, depending on the time of year, okay? So let's look at our next slide. All right, so here we see a picture of some Spanish moss, some Spanish oaks, okay? And the text says the southernmost states, that means the states that are very, very south, they experience seasonal contrast in both temperate and full foliage. So both in temperature and in foliage, okay? Now, looking at our landscape of the South, let's talk about some of the geographical features that you can see in the South. So our next slide, this looks like this is a picture of a bayou, right, or a swamp, and that's what the text is telling us. Some common environments include bayous and swamplands, all right? Next, we see a forest, and these are the southern pine forests. Pine, pino, it's a type of tree here that we can see, all right? The warm, temperate forests of the Appalachians, okay? And here we can see some more of these forests. It looks like there's a little lake here in the center of this picture. So there are mountains as well in the South, right? If you remember from our map at the very, very beginning of the lesson, talking about the Appalachian Mountains, okay? Our next slide is showing us the savannas of the southern Great Plains. All right, so we'll see more about the Great Plains in another video, but in the southern portion of those Great Plains, there are savannas, right? Which means that it's flat lands, yeah, and that it sometimes rains in these areas. There's sometimes seasons that are wet, and sometimes there are seasons that are dry, okay? So there are savannas in the southern Great Plains. And look, there are even maritime forests along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts. So it means that by the ocean that you can find these large forests. You can find trees that are growing very tall, very high, and they're also very close together, right? It's dense forest. Okay, so let's move on. I want us to just look at some of these notable cities in the South. And I don't know if it's because I'm from this region and that I know it maybe a little bit better than other parts, but I included a couple of different cities here. There are quite a lot that made my list that I think that are notable. So let's just take a look. So starting first, my hometown, this is Memphis, Tennessee. It's here in the corner of Tennessee. The second city is Nashville, which is the capital of the state of Tennessee. Number 3 is Charleston, South Carolina, a beautiful, beautiful city on the coast. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's unbelievable. My best friend in the whole world lives in Charleston, and I got to visit him last summer, and I've never seen a place like it. It's unbelievable. So number 4 is Asheville. Asheville, North Carolina is actually about here. It's pretty close to the Tennessee border, all right? Charlotte is our next city. This is the capital of North Carolina. Number 6 is the capital of the state of Georgia. This is Atlanta. Number 7 I've included. This is a city in Louisiana. This is called New Orleans. A very, very famous city for music, for food, culture. There's a lot of cool things that go on in the city of New Orleans. So I've included that in our list. Number 8 is a city called Fayetteville in Arkansas. It's close to over here. It's not on the map, but it is a really, really beautiful town. It's a smaller city. There's a large university there that is very, very well known across the region called the University of Arkansas, but it's a beautiful, beautiful place. Number 9 is a city that is close to the Gulf of Mexico. This is Mobile, Alabama. Another important city for culture and music specifically. There's a very famous recording studio in Mobile, Alabama, or close to it, Gulf Shores. Or Muscle Shoals, I should say. So number 10 is Louisville, Kentucky. Okay, another pretty important city in the South. And number 11, I have included, this is Richmond, Virginia. All right, which is the capital of Virginia. And number 12 I've included is Virginia Beach. Okay, so those are the 12 cities that I've included to be notable in the South. But let's go ahead and let's look at our final presentations for this unit. So I know that we've talked a lot over this course, over this class. The next 2 videos will be much, much shorter because we had to cover the introductions. We were talking about the different terms, the climates, giving some background, and we're also going to be talking about these final presentations here. So I'm sorry that this video is running a little long, but this is what we are going to do for our final presentation. So just wanted to explain this briefly, and we'll talk more about this in class, I'm sure. But we will assign you, your teacher and I, we will assign you a region of the United States, okay? And you'll be working together with a pair, with a friend or a person, right? So you all will select a city that you want to visit. Okay, you'll tell me first why it is that you want to go there, okay? So you'll tell me things like, what state is the city located in, right? It's the second bullet point here. What region is the state located in, right? Number 3, is the city known for any specific regional foods, right? What can you eat there? Number 4, does this city have any professional sports teams, right? Do you have a basketball team or a baseball team? Is there a football team, an American football team that plays in that city, okay? Number 5, what attractions does this city have to offer for someone visiting for the first time, right? So I want to know, what can you do in this city, right? What can you see? Can you see different cultural events? Can you go to see theaters? Can you go see concerts? Are there special events that happen throughout the year that would be something that you would want to go to, maybe a regional food exhibition or a fair, a festival, something like that. Okay. Number 6, I want to know, what do you need to bring with you on your trip? So what will you pack in your bag? What will you take with you on this trip? And number 7, how are you getting to your destination? Right? I want to know how you're going to get to this place. Okay. Number 8, I want to know, when would you like to go? When would you like to visit this place? Right? And number 9 and 10 are questions that relate to each other. So number 9, based on your research, everything that you have learned so far, do you want to live in this city one day? And then the final question is, why or why not? Why would you like to live in the city that you all have presented about? Okay, so that's what we'll be doing for our final presentations at the very end of these next 3 lessons, okay? So we'll be working together in class on these presentations throughout the course of the next 3 weeks, okay? The next 2 weeks. So I just wanted to include that in our video so that you could see, okay? At the end of our presentation, I have our geography vocabulary, right? So this is from our terms at the beginning of the lesson. So I'll scroll through. This is our first page. This is our second page for geography vocabulary. You can pause this video if you would need to look at that more. And then our third, we have our weather vocabulary. Okay. And that is the end of the presentation. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for watching the video. The next 2, I promise, will be very, 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 very short compared to this one. So thank you very much for everything. I really do appreciate it. And of course, as always, if you do have any questions, if there's something that you would like to know more about anything that you've seen in these videos, please ask me, ask your teacher. We will be happy to help answer any of these questions that we can. So thank you very much for your time, and I will see you all very soon. Y'all have a good one. Bye.